So great to have everybody here for our event on climate and AI and how AI is helping to accelerate climate solutions. We're really excited for the discussion today with Will, Jeremy, and Mishal. I'm Alex Katzmann, the founding partner at Growth Inflection. We'll be moderating the event with my partner, Stefan Laengin. We've both spent over a decade in leadership roles at climate tech startups. And right now, with climate disasters happening more and more frequently, it's urgent that we go all in on scaling up solutions. We started Growth Inflection earlier this year to partner with early stage teams in climate tech to accelerate scaling, go-to-market, and operations. And now with billions of dollars from the Inflation Reduction Act hitting the market over the next year, the time to act is right now. So today, we're going to dig into AI's role in accelerating climate solutions. We'll start with quick intros from each of the speakers and then move into an interactive discussion. We really welcome your participation. So as we're going, please drop any comments or questions that you have into the chat, and we'll try and work them into the discussion. So let's kick off first with Jeremy. Be great if you could take a couple minutes on your background, what climate challenges Station A tackles, and the moment you realized what the potential of AI is for climate tech.
For sure. Thanks, Alex. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining here. So I'm Jeremy Lucas. I'm a co-founder and also the head of engineering at an early stage startup called Station A. Station A, what we do is we basically help commercial and industrial real estate owners actually not just plan, but also take action on their climate goals. And we do that by providing a marketplace where those real estate owners can actually list various clean energy projects that they're hoping to complete to get competitive quotes and bids and proposals on those projects. Before working at Station A, my background originally is in sort of digital retail and ad tech. I know I said the A word, ad tech, but through that experience, I think I really got a good glimpse into how things like big data, distributed compute and distributed systems, and then eventually applied data science can actually completely, and radically change an industry. And it wasn't until about 2016 where I eventually broke into the climate tech space, interviewed at a company called NRG, realized, they've got a bunch of kind of unstructured or semi-structured data lying around and really no clue what to do or how to deal with it, to actually make something meaningful from it. So that was kind of like maybe the first time I knew like, okay, there's definitely a real opportunity here for something like AI.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy. Well, we'll go to Mishal next.
Hey, everybody. My name is Thadani. I'm the CEO of RHIZOME, and I'll give you a brief description of what RHIZOME does, which is that we help utility companies identify weather and climate risks on their transmission and distribution systems, really focusing in on specific climate hazards, and then generating a quantitative risk evaluation for each line segment of their service territory. And then as they're looking to make a whole lot of investments related to resilience, so it's things like undergrounding, system hardening, a lot of stuff that's coming from the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, we can really help them prioritize and plan those projects through really robust impact metrics and cost benefit analyses. I got into this game a long time ago, right after I graduated college, when I was developing wind farms for BP. So I spent some time in the utility scale side of things, thought it was a little bit too slow for my taste. So I decided to jump straight into residential, commercial, and community solar, where I turned into a project developer on that end. I started my first company developing solar projects and ran into a whole lot of barriers, right? And mostly around policy and regulation. And if anyone has worked in clean energy before, they've run into these same exact barriers. So I decided to dive straight into one of the tools that represents one of the best levers that we have to accelerate decarbonization, increase reliability and resilience, at least our energy systems, and that is utility regulation, which isn't super sexy, but very, very, very important. I grew some expertise in this space and wanted to do so, advocating for new policy and regulations for new technologies, and was very fascinated by the AI and digital space, considering the probably thousands of use cases that can apply in the utility sector. So I'm really excited to have this conversation, share some of what I've learned.
Awesome. Thanks, Mish. All right, and we'll go to Will now.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Will Clutter. I'm the Vice President of Operations and Strategy at Climate AI. So Climate AI, similar to RHIZOME, but for the food and agriculture industry, is focused on climate resilience across supply chains, but specifically the food and agriculture supply chain. So we work end to end. It could be with a seed company figuring out what traits to breed for future climates, or a large food and beverage company thinking about their sourcing footprint of the future as crop suitability changes with our climate. My background has been in climate my whole career. I was one of those folks who's lucky enough to walk into the right classroom in their freshman year of undergrad, took a class on climate change, and kind of never looked back. Right out of undergrad, I actually moved to India to work on the intersection of climate and water resources, and really get an understanding of like, what does climate change mean in terms of on the ground impacts. And from there, I had a variety of different roles: corporate sustainability, clean tech, management consulting, working in with large supply chain businesses. But all of that sort of came together when I joined Climate AI, when I realized so I'm not a tech person by training, but sort of seeing the way that Climate AI and other companies were starting to apply novel technologies like AI to a lot of the problems that I'd seen in my corporate experience, my on the ground experience. And so it's exciting to move over from studying the problem to acting on it.
Fantastic. Well, I think we're going to move into questions now. Stefan's going to kick off with some questions for the speakers. And then, as we said, if you have any questions in the audience, please just drop them in the chat and we'll try and work them in.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, Alex. Am I unmuted? Yeah, I'm unmuted. Thank you, Alex. Yeah, my first question is, how are you using AI in your company solution, and why do you think it's a game changer? Mish, do you wanna answer first?
Sure, I'll get this one off. Yes, absolutely. So machine learning and broadly AI is really crucial to our core product. What we're aiming to do is really learn from past instances of extreme weather events that have had some sort of impact on a distribution system. And this could mean high winds that have caused poles to fail or vegetation to make contact with that infrastructure, or extreme weather that has caused transformers to overload. And so there are different modes of failure for different type of extreme weather events. And to really learn, the best way to learn from all those historic incidents, when you look at the past 10 to 15 years where we have that data from both the utility and external weather and climate data sets, is through machine learning. So we can take predictive models to forecast, given certain extreme weather events in the future, which assets are most likely to fail. So I'll start with right there with saying that, AI and ML is really core to our solution when we do our modeling, when we start working with utilities. But then there are other ancillary uses as well, right? For instance, one common trope about utilities is that they have really poor, unclean, or incomplete data sets. And so what we've been doing is using some of the later generative AI techniques to create synthetic data where utilities may have not had specific data to their systems, and generate some approximations within confidence intervals using those generated data sets. So I'll keep it at high level for now, but then obviously always happy to dive in further.
Okay. Thank you, Mish. Jeremy, do you want to continue? Do you remember the question? Should I repeat it?
Absolutely. The question being, how is AI used, at each of our companies?
Exactly.
So I think, a core part to how AI is actually applied at Station A really kind of dives through both sort of this climate planning and action sort of process within our company, within our product. So just for like a little bit of a slice of how a commercial, let's say a commercial solar project looks, is this long sort of dance between a real estate owner who maybe has a plan in mind. Maybe they have a sustainability goal, or they have no sustainability goal at all, and they're wondering, how can I further monetize my real estate, or how can I maybe cut costs if they also occupy, let's say, the real estate they own. And then they have to go and find a provider who can actually, let's say, suggest that they put solar on the rooftop, or suggest that they put carport in the parking lot, et cetera. And then they work with that solution provider all the way through this process where they're designing the system, they're figuring out financials, if it's going to be a finance project versus an all cash project. Anyway, I'll spare you the gory details there, even if it feels like I didn't. But it's a very lengthy process. It requires a lot of information exchange to occur. And probably the worst thing about it is about 30 to 40% of the overhead of the cost of a clean energy project goes to that crazy, complicated back and forth process. And so a key part of how Station A applies AI within our product is actually to streamline that 30 to 40%. We're not going to be able to necessarily auto-design the perfect solar system, and I think there's a lot of companies out there that try to, but there's always someone who's going to at the end approve that, say no, that's not feasible, or hey, that's feasible. But we do want to streamline that 30 to 40% of the project, which is simply just passing data around, getting ahead of like what we call desktop analysis. So just the super high level, would this project pencil out or not, right? Would this meet the real estate owner's goals or not? And that's really a combination of, a lot of ML and AI models that do things like project future electrical consumption, or project future utility rates, or project, the actual operations, the output of like a solar system, let's say, to other things, related to like extractive models that try to pull out bits and pieces from, we'll call it from legislation and policy. Right, to help a buyer of a clean energy system actually know what they're signing up for. Sorry, that was a really big sort of slice of the pie there, but hope you guys are hungry for that.
Thank you, Jeremy. Will, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. So at Climate AI, I like to think of our product as our technology is operating in two layers. There's the forecast layer and then the application layer. So on the forecast layer, I always say, like, the reason I introduce us as a supply chain risk company is that we are not focused so much on sort of near-term decisions. Like a lot of ag tech is really sort of on field, like what can I do tomorrow? What can I do today? With sort of more granular, hyper-localized insights. Super useful, really powerful and important things. That's not what we do at Climate AI. We are much more focused on sort of the movement, optimizing the movement of physical goods, which in our case is usually a food and agricultural product. In order to have a forecast that is usable for our customers, that means increasing the confidence in that forecast over longer time horizons, because a supply chain can't operate on the 7-day forecast that you get on your phone. And so there's a couple problems that we're solving. One is sort of the data paucity problem, that we've only been observing the Earth for a relatively short period of time, which makes it very difficult to train a machine learning model. So sort of the original Climate AI innovation that got us out of a dorm room at Stanford, like any good Silicon Valley startup, was the ability to use transfer learning on simulated climates that are used for sort of academic purposes to the real world. And so that increased the data sets available to us to train our models. The second thing that we're doing is looking at, when we start to think about longer term Earth systems, we start to think of a lot about in terms of oceans being sort of the memory for climate. The easiest way to think about it, it's warm, 20 miles off the coast of California. That warmth creates moisture in the air, and that becomes a storm about a month later. But these relationships are actually unique all over the world. And so simple linear regressions often can't account for the fact that, one, these relationships are nonlinear, and two, that these different data points express themselves differently in different regions. And so to solve what is more of a big data problem in that case of all the potential connections, that's another opportunity for AI and machine learning. And then the third piece, and this is, I think, something that's really, really important, is what we call a physics-constrained AI. So we're marrying our AI and ML models with physical simulations so that our AI models don't predict things that are physically impossible. So think of like ChatGPT says things that are wrong or doesn't make sense because ChatGPT doesn't walk around in the real world and experience things like you and I do. Imagine ChatGPT saying it is negative precipitation today. It rained in reverse. That's something that we've seen with an AI model in the wild, but our physics constrained models prevent that from happening. And then the last piece, so that's all the forecast. The last piece is that application layer. We always say a forecast is only as good as the action that you can take with it. And so it's similar to Mish was saying, it's about translating those forecasts to actions or impact metrics that our customers care about, which in food and agriculture often comes down to yield or quality.
Mm. Great, thank you. That's a lot of information. Alex, do you want to continue?
Yeah. So no, just to sum up, I think it's very cool. We've got 3 kind of distinct use cases here around grid resiliency, project development for electrification, building decarbonization, and agriculture with supply chains and forecasting. So it gives a sample of the fact that like this technology is pretty powerful. Well, I think for the audience here, maybe be helpful to actually get a little bit of a layman's definition of the AI landscape and the different types of AI that are out there and the categories of value being added, just so folks can orient themselves. Maybe Jeremy, you can take a stab at that one.
Yeah, sure. I'll make an attempt. Please, Mish, William, feel free to fill in any of the gaps there. I think especially right now, you know, there is a lot of hype. You guys may or may not have noticed in the AI space, primarily around what's been dubbed Gen AI or generative AI, and really, you know, things like ChatGPT or even things like Stable Diffusion, these kinds of things, or DALL-E, maybe you've heard of. These models are really meant to sort of create new data, if that makes any sense. So someone like something like ChatGPT, yes, it was trained on a ton of text, all the websites in the world, et cetera. But it's really kind of regurgitating that, if you will, into maybe a summarized version or into question and answering. So it's taking one form of the data and generating a new sort of form of similar, statistically similar data sort of through the process. Kind of before that, there was a lot of sort of more traditional ML and AI, which were statistical models. Really, we're talking about things like classifiers, things that can say, let's say a really common one in like biotech is like, hey, identify if that anomaly in X-ray is, or imagery is cancerous or not, right? So a classifier would tell you yes or no, it's cancerous at a certain given probability. And then there's also a lot of like forecasting sort of AI as well within the landscape that's also present in climate too. These are things like, time series predictions, forecasting electrical consumption, forecasting utility rates, stuff like that. I will also add to, as like an interesting point, Will, you brought up transfer learning earlier, which I think is actually a really neat sort of technique where you're taking, let's say, some form of AI trained to do one task, and kind of Frankenstein it together with some new data, maybe a new task, and kind of reapplying some of its strengths toward another. I'll give one example of maybe like in 16, 17, Google published a paper on what they called their Inception AI architecture. This was a computer vision model. So this was something that was meant to look at images and identify, classify what kind of image it was. At Station A couple of years ago, we actually took their Inception architecture and via transfer learning, we adapted it to identify rooftop solar. And so we were able to kind of bootstrap off of a lot of the learnings it already had, and then reapply it to just a brand new task that it had never done before. But we had sort of a leg up to start, so to speak. Mish or Will, I don't know if there's any other like major gaps you want to fill in there.
I think you did a wonderful job giving an overview, Jeremy. The only thing that I would really stress, right, is like the concept of the notion that AI is going to solve like so many of our problems right now. When I think the reality, especially in industry, is that based off the underlying data sets and the subsequent use case, different approaches to using data, to modeling data, and then delivering the results of those models could look really, really different. And so, you know, in my previous world when I was at Urban, you know, we were building rules-based models to identify when safety incidents could occur on construction sites, right? That's saying like, hey, if you have like things at elevation on a shaky terrain, if these things are true, then this might be at high risk of a safety incident. You might want to conduct some sort of intervention, right? And that's a very clear rules-based model, which is I think the original form of AI since it was coined a few decades ago. So that's kind of the only thing that I would just throw out there in terms of the ways to think about structured you know, methods for categorizing different types of models is understanding the use case, the underlying data sets, and what results you're actually trying to achieve at the end of the day.
Over to you, Stefan.
Yeah, it's me again. Hi. Yeah, if you think about AI, then there are still concerns in the market, right? How reliable is the output? Also, kind of what kind of quality have the data I feed the machine with, right? Kind of all these things. So and I can imagine that it's or actually I have this experience that it's not as easy as it looks like if you want to get a buy-in, right? Kind of especially now talking or want to ask the question to you, Mish, regarding utilities, because you know they are trained and all kind of the attitude is to keep things safe and the light on. And now you're coming along and say kind of, oh, I have AI and please, this is the way to go. And yeah, I recommend to take this decision based on the data from this machine. And yeah, so how do you see the situation and how do you get buy-in for these results and the output of the machine?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So largely we run into this challenge because at the end of the day, we're working with engineers at giant utilities who are making decisions based off of their engineering design standards as well as their intuition. And we're saying, hey, that actually might not be enough to make good quality decisions, especially related to future extreme weather events or future climate threats and the impact that it's going to have on your assets. So how do you bridge that gap with the new technology that is seen as more black box than what an engineer is typically used to? What we have been doing and have been putting a great deal of intention around is the explainability of our models. And that's explainability across the model chain, starting with what data sets are going into it, both within the utility system data as well as data that we're bringing to the table, weather, climate, topography, and other types of geographic data sets, as well as vegetation, are all really important to train these models. What data features are we engineering? And we go through this process of data gathering and feature engineering alongside the utility to ensure we're capturing their expertise, but also to make sure that they're getting buy-in on the features that we're engineering. And then at the end of the day, when we're actually doing model selection, we show the results and output of different models that we're looking at selecting. Sometimes they're more traditional statistics types of approaches, much like linear regressions, and other times they're more of deep learning neural networks or otherwise decision trees that we're applying. And when we have this type of ensemble of models side by side, you can actually see the pros and cons of them. And the engineers will be able to see that. And so it's one thing to get the engineers on board with the data to use, the features to engineer, the models to choose, and then getting really confident around the results. But it's another thing to get a regulator on board, because every utility decision, if it involves some sort of cost and some sort of decision-making process, is going to have to get regulatory approval. So we have to do a very similar sort of exercise, open the books, so to speak, to the regulators as well. Maybe not to that specific level of depth, but we have to really show the process that went in instead of just keeping it a closed black box. So far, and we have quite the journey to go, we have been seeing some really good success with at least our approach. But then, of course, the real test will come when utilities start using us to file rate cases, so on and so forth, and we'll have a much better understanding on how to adapt from that point.
Thanks, Mish.
I think just one thing to add that the point on the black box, and we see it a lot at Climate AI, is we have a number of customers who really just kind of care about the final answer, like is yield going to go up or down, and like that's what they need to make decisions. And so actually a black box would work just fine for them. But for many of our customers, the features and the why behind the output is actually more important, because that's what drives actionability. So like yield is going down because these specific events are likely to increase or decrease in frequency. That is what leads them to be able to take preventative actions of, oh, maybe there's a different tactics that we can do. We can plant at a different time. We can, apply certain sprays or coverings to the crop, et cetera. That's actually how we capture value from Climate AI. And so for us, that explainability becomes a really part of the core offer. And one thing that we've invested a lot in, I think, over the past 6 months has been doing more to make those features part of our product story, rather than just sort of making the answer and the workflow the center of everything.
Thank you, but I think it's also depending on how big and diverse the data is you fill in, right? If you're describing something which is, I can still follow the decision of the engine, right? At some point, it's getting so complex and probably said, oh, okay, now I'm not able to really follow, because it's so complex that so many information coming, so many variables, so many attributes that it's just impossible to follow the different steps. And then, of course, it will be a black box, right?
But that's where I would sort of say, like, then your challenge on the technical side is how do you break that problem down into smaller pieces that speak to each other. And like, I don't want to use the concept of microservices, because that's a different thing, but it's a similar idea of like different models feeding each other and make the problem digestible for people at different steps. That's one thing that we've also done is, so our long-term climate projections are a bit more like what you described. There are so many things that get layered on, and we've realized that by breaking it out piece by piece, and actually showing a live demonstration to the customer, now we're going to apply this model and look what happens. Now we're going to apply this model. Now you can actually watch like the unprocessed data slowly become more and more accurate to looking backwards how it would have predicted today. And that sort of helps build that understandability. And we did that originally as an internal QA to make sure that each model was working. And then thankfully our data science team is very customer friendly and like, hey, I think our customers would actually benefit from seeing this work on a stepwise basis.
Yeah. No, really interesting. And I think this transitions well into our next topic, which is around go-to-market. And since you're all kind of at early stage growing startups, a big focus obviously is securing more customers and being able to invest more in your solutions and expand the impact. So, very curious, how is AI impacting your go-to-market? Are you seeing this help or hurt with winning new business? Any hurdles that selling an AI solution has in the market? And maybe Will, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so there's definitely, it's cuts both ways. I definitely sit in a lot of sales meetings, especially with executives, since ChatGPT came on the scene, where they'll just say very simply, do you use AI? Because I'm supposed to be using AI. So if you're AI, I can buy you. And I'm like, well, that's a great conversation. But then of course we still need to dig into the use case, like will they actually get value from the product? But that certainly helps from that standpoint, because there's budget at least mentally earmarked for that use case. But we also see a lot of customers who have probably had that conversation before. They bought something because it had AI in the name, and they had a really bad experience. It didn't live up to the promise of the product. There was a black box. They didn't understand the outcome, whatever the case may be. And so that actually becomes a red flag for us in the sales process that this deal might go south, because we kind of get lumped in with the AI snake oil salespeople, as it were. And so that's when we hear that, we know we have a long way to go to kind of not only build confidence in our product, but rebuild confidence in AI as a solution overall. And so that's where we do some of the things like I talked about before, of really trying to be as transparent as possible. But I would say as it booms, it definitely cuts both ways.
It makes sense. An interesting question from Casey. So maybe direct this to you next, Mishal. Talking about how utilities are conservative, can be a slow-moving space. Does your technology apply to other sectors that have less obstacles? So curious how you see go to market with utilities, and does this apply to other sectors as well?
It's a fantastic question, and we decided very early in our journey that we were going to focus on utilities for one reason and one reason alone, and that is because they, as a backbone to society, are experiencing large consequences of failure, devastation, communities being disrupted, lives being lost because they don't have access to power when these extreme weather events occur. And the industry as a whole, and this is kind of where I've been researching and studying and working within this this area of grid resilience. We're at a point where utilities are investing billions of dollars in this problem, right? And that's only increasing. Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act poured $11 billion more to make investments actively to increase grid resilience. And what those investments mean is like there are a lot of tiny little decisions that utilities need to make, like little $1,000 decisions that get made on an everyday basis. And what we really need to do is prioritize where those go in order to get the grid to a place where it's not going to fail so often that we're not going to experience those consequences. And what I'm really trying to say is there's an enormous need in the utility sector for a solution like ours. And we tested it with, we interviewed about 30 utilities to see, would this type of approach of decision intelligence, we didn't even use AI, speaking to the last question, but this just general concept of decision intelligence related to resilience, is that going to be something that's a big appetite in the utility sector? And what we found overwhelmingly is that it would be. And then you design your business around that, right? And I do have a background and experience working with utilities. So, I think we're ahead of the curve than other companies would be in terms of going to market with utilities. But do we think that we can apply the same sort of platform where, very similar to Will, we're crunching a whole lot of climate data around a building block, and that building block is simply an asset. An asset can be a wooden pole, can be a transformer, it could be a farm or some sort of ag space, right? Well, and it could also be property. It could be other types of infrastructure, and it could be businesses like data centers, for instance, as well, right? And where we're finding our niche is modeling all of these various external extreme weather and climate risks around an asset where the owner or the operator or the insurer of that asset or the financier of that asset needs to make some decision with that risk in mind. And so are there other industries that we plan on approaching? Absolutely. But we're seeing a whole lot of quote unquote product market fit, since that buzzword hasn't been thrown in yet within the utility sector.
Great. All right. Well, I think, Stefan, over to you. Mariana had a question on standards, which ties into our next topic on data standards.
Yes, time is running fast, right? So I will hurry up a little bit. And yes, I had a question regarding standards, but I think maybe you should use Mariana's question. So how important are standards development to accelerate the adoption of climate technologies versus each company building their own ML models? And I don't know, Jeremy, do you want to take on this?
Yeah, I can kick us off there because this one's also very near and dear to my heart. Thanks for asking that great question. It's really funny because I think, frankly, a lot of the data problems, the AI problems, I should say, that Mish, Will, and myself have described here so far, a lot of it like orbits around this idea of data generation or data augmentation. And kind of when you sit back for a bit, you start to see that we're kind of filling in a lot of gaps for the lack of data standardization, the lack of data accessibility, the lack of open data, et cetera. And so I think there's actually a huge amount of sort of distance that we could go through building standards bodies, working groups around data standardization and accessibility. I know there's like a couple of efforts out there. There's also a couple of efforts out. For example, I'm thinking of there's this solar app program, for example, which is trying to provide not so much data as much as like automation of solar permitting, for example. And where's another one? There's like the Deep Solar project was another recent sort of one-off project where I think some researchers at Stanford open source a data set with some that identified where all the installed solar exists across the US. And while I think these efforts are beneficial, for lack of standards, there's still going to be just a one-off data set that someone could pick up or dust off, or realize it's 20 years old and it needs to be refreshed. So I think there's still plenty of opportunity for growth there, because again, that's the starting point, right? Understanding the data is just the beginning. Using that data to actually then make a decision, inform a decision, that's really what we're after, right?
Okay, makes sense. But I think it's especially here, Mariana mentioned the carbon reporting. I know that it's a kind of to define what kind of tree is really capturing what kind of amount of CO2 emissions, right? I think it starts really kind of simple like this, and so someone has to define it, and then it goes into the calculation, and then someone is actually developing a model based on this. Is there so what is kind of, it's maybe to everybody, what is your thinking about this? It's kind of at some point humans are still involved in taking the decision, right? And then it goes, they take the data and the assumption, and then it goes from there. And I think that there are already now startups who are kind of evaluating the carbon emission carbon removal model. But yeah, is there any other opinions on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just add as well, there's some recent news, I think it's from the SEC requiring some set of buildings, sorry, I'm really weak on the details here, to actually report on their carbon emissions in some public area. I'm not sure where that is. I think I recall it being like, maybe available on their websites too or something. But the point is, like, we're kind of, I think as a whole, like slowly moving toward like, all right, could we, at least on like carbon reporting front, for example, can we sort of do this go through this self-reported exercise of sorts? Maybe that helps to define then like what data is being reported on. I'm not sure though, like how much further that goes. Do we need like some group to actually define what that standard is, or are we just going to be, happy with maybe companies self-reporting or coming up with their own details? At least from my perspective, that's yet to be determined.
It's probably an own session.
Yeah. Well, I do think though, you said it well at the beginning, is like, we were talking about AI, but a lot of these, we're ultimately solving a physical world problem, and that requires like physical sciences to build the appropriate foundation. Like, it's not, maybe AI can assist in certain areas there, maybe it can't. But soil carbon is a question that we get asked a lot about, even though we don't do soil carbon, but it just happens, when you're working in agriculture these days. We get a lot of questions to how our models can be applied, and kind of our answer is usually like, well, someone needs to actually figure out in the physical world how to do monitoring and verification of soil carbon. And I was talking to a buyer at a major food company the other day, and she's like, I get pitched all the time by different startups using AI, but she doesn't trust it because the physical world science isn't fully demonstrated at scale. And so I think a lot of these problems will start with sort of the hard sciences before they make their way into scale with companies like ours.
All right. Well, we're getting very close to the end here, so I'll do one rapid fire question where we'll just get like a 10-second response from each of you, and then I think Stefan's going to wrap us. So what big breakthroughs or developments do you see coming in AI in the near future that are going to change the direction for your business? Start with you, Mish.
Yeah, but by no means am I an AI visionary here from the technology front. I'll leave that to my co-founder Rahul. But one thing that's going to be game changing is implementing generative AI tools within our application. One of the things that we are really excited about is that one of the major value propositions of our platform is that we allow utilities to build from the bottoms up asset investment plans that help increase the resilience of the grid, and then show the cost benefit and the impact metrics in a reporting format that can be sent directly to the regulatory team for a regulatory filing, and have it fully baked and justified in front of a regulator. If you've ever read a regulatory filing, I hope you haven't.
Oh, it's brutal. They're like hundreds of pages long. It's so detailed. It's intense.
It's my bedtime reading. But what we're really excited about is the ability to take the quantitative measures that we are producing and actually generate text out of it automatically. And obviously, this is going to be text that needs to be heavily edited, but a lot of time from engineers, right? People who should be spending their time making decisions, evaluating the actual system, is spent writing testimony in front of regulators to actually get their investments justified. And that to me is an untenable mode. I spend time with a lot of these engineers and they don't want to do it. So it's things like that where we're finding a lot of use cases for some of the newer generative AI tools that I've already seen in some of the other peer technology companies as well. HData is a good example where they're also kind of a energy regulatory reporting tool, and they've implemented generative AI tools to actually conduct really quick searches for data. And I'm really excited about that because I think it's going to, at the end of the day, a software platform is a tool, and it's going to really enhance the effectiveness of that tool and make a lot of the human hours going to things that are more productive instead of just the menial tasks. So that's something that's pretty exciting for me.
Great. Well, we're really short on time now, so maybe Will 20 seconds and then Jeremy 20 seconds, and Stefan can wrap us.
20-second answer is I think AI companies taking the same approach that vertical SaaS has and being verticalized and providing value, not just in providing value in deeper and deeper applications. And similar, do you have a food and ag company here using AI? You have a utility company using AI. You have a solar development company using AI. And so I think going deeper along that vertical and application route and continuing to unlock a lot deeper value. That's what I see from a business perspective.
Cool. All right. Last up, Jeremy.
All right, 20 seconds here. I would say there's two key things I'm super excited about. One is this increased focus on building open models. I don't think the companies of the future are going to be using open AI for powering their climate tech solutions. So bringing those into the open source world and open data world is something I'm hugely excited about. Related to that is also something called knowledge distillation. Basically, we have all these large language models. We have small language models that perform almost as well, but are way less carbon intensive themselves, are way more accessible to startups and other folks in the open source community. I think this is what takes AI as being like a niche thing that people can play around with a paid subscription, to something that every company and every person can make use of for climate tech. So
awesome.
Well, we are over time. I have two topics. One topic is, first, thank you for all these kind of really valuable inputs, Mish, Will, and Jeremy. That was awesome. I think Alex and I, we have still kind of 3 or 4 questions, but it's just too short. But we need to have a second and third session for it. But first I want to say thank you. Also, thank you to the attendees for participating. And if you have a topic which would make sense to deal and discuss in our next episode, then please reach out to us. Also, if you know a speaker who would be interested. And yeah, otherwise I will. Oh yes, I have on my list that these are 3 companies who are still hiring. So I will share the career sites of the three companies in the LinkedIn comment chat. And yeah, otherwise, I would say I would finish it here and say goodbye.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Great discussion, Will, Jeremy, and Mish, and look forward to seeing everybody again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.